right. Can you hear me? Yep. All right. Welcome, everybody. In person, folks out here, folks here online. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Sneha Shaha, and this is Oz Khan. We are the TPM chapter Trails, Bay Area Trails event chapter leads, and excited to be here with all of you. And we have amazing speakers coming up. I will let Oz Khan share more about the event and about the happening events about the trails all over the country. All right.
Yeah. Thanks, Snail, for the intro. Yeah, we started our journey actually right at the beginning of this year, and I see some similar faces and some new faces. Thanks everyone for coming in person here today and joining online in their homes or offices. So yeah, this is I think our fifth event, right?
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, really happy to see you all here. And we would like to actually, dedicate today's event to infrastructure TPMs. So it was really actually in high demand topic from our community. And we have really experienced speakers today here. Thanks for joining, Kevin, Vivian, and Param. And so we also, I mean, I'd like to also thank Coda for, opening their office and hosting and supporting us today here. Thanks, Al. Again, yeah. And I'd like to actually invite Janat to speak a little bit about TPM Summit, upcoming summit in October. Yeah, Janat. Let's speak a little bit.
Thank you, Oskan. Thank you, Snehal. Welcome, everybody. Really good to see you. Folks online, we see you as well. We have lots of people joining virtually as well, and I'm pretty sure a few of other folks will come in person. As Oskan said, TPM Summit. Who knows about TPM Summit? Raise your hands. Okay, well, surprisingly, we have few folks who have not heard about TPM Summit, even though we try to publish on LinkedIn like almost every day about this. So quickly, TPM Summit is the first industry-wide conference dedicated to technical program managers. We put together last year with Josie right there. Josh, he's up in Seattle. So three of us came together and got the conference going right here down street on Shoreline in Computer History Museum. October 4th, it will be in the same venue. We have a full day of amazing, insightful talks, presentations. We'll have almost all TPM books authors. We'll have coaches. And if you will sign up after visiting this event virtually or in person, you can use a promo code Coda for 10% discount. So thanks for Coda, thanks for Al. And then Al, I want to bring in Al to the stage to quickly tell us about Coda quickly.
Hey everyone, thank you so much for coming. My name is Al Chen. I'm a solutions architect at Coda, basically building the platform. Flew all the way from New York just for this. I'm flying back tomorrow morning. So thank you so much for coming. Coda, all-in-one platform mixed between Google Docs and Excel. I'll quickly talk about a story. It kind of explains what we do. So I was talking to a TPM a few weeks ago. She manages a bunch of feature launches and product launches within Google Sheets because that's what her and her stakeholders like to use, different teams. But all the engineering work still gets done in Jira. And so what she has to do is she imports in all of her Jira issues and stories into another sheet in the Google Sheet, and then has to manually cross-reference the keys from the Jira issues into the feature roadmap because her and her other team likes using the feature roadmap in the Google Sheets, but engineering team is using Jira. What's incredible is that she has all these Google Apps script written to automate a bunch of reporting back and forth between Jira and the Google Sheet. And I was looking at this. This is amazing. You've wrote all this, but it's so hard to maintain. And that's essentially what Coda is meant to solve for, is eliminating all that back and forth between Google Apps script, copy and pasting between Jira and Google Sheets, so on and so forth. So that's kind of what we do. You're probably wondering, hey, show me, don't tell. So I actually recorded a quick video showcasing this problem on my LinkedIn, Al Chen Coda. You can take a look and you'll see what it's about. But I really want to give it back to you all and the community and the speakers. So thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, Al. All right, so without further ado, I'd like to introduce our speakers today. So Vivian, Senior Principal TPM at Splunk. Welcome. And Param, Staff TPM at Robinhood. Welcome, Param. And Kevin, Director of TPM at Waymo. All right, thanks again joining for us today, everyone. And yeah, we have some great questions from our community actually today, and I'd like to start with those. And what the main actually topic was actually, how is the infrastructure defined in your org, and how would you define an infrastructure TPM? So Kevin, let's start with you.
Right. So that's a two-part question here. One is, how do we define infrastructure? And then the second part is, what is the role of an infrastructure TPM? Yeah, I think over the years, your very basic components and foundation pieces of infrastructure doesn't really deviate, right? You have your compute, you have your storage, and then you have your network. Everything usually circles around three items. So whether you're in self-driving cars or finance or just regular infrastructure stuff, you typically would be managing three of these components in some way, shape, or form, right? Everything you do is just how you scale it, how you make sure that it's available, and all these other things that come along, all the fancy words that end with Y at the end of the day, right? So very typically, we try to just manage the supply and demand of what's needed for engineering, just to make sure they have the right infrastructure to do stuff in a productive manner. And then we also organize our TPMs the same way, where we try to kind of make sure that specific areas that kind of need kind of attention, everything from forecasting demand, how people use it, how people store data, how people process data, how we move data around. That's typically how we organize our organization.
And yeah, same question. So how is infra defining in your org, and the core responsibilities of the TPM, infra TPM,
Sure,
and how you define infra TPM?
Yeah, thanks for having me here. Thanks for the hot seat. It kind of, Kevin touched pretty much all the topics here, but generally speaking, I want to be kind of very generic to this response due to the confidentiality of the Robinhood. But generally speaking, the infra, if you look at it, right, so compute, storage, networking, and you have the security and the data aspects of things. And depends on the size of the company, like whether it's a startup or mid-sized companies or large companies, typically like everybody is on the cloud. So how you want to kind of break your components into these areas, they typically want to kind of run the teams also associated to that. So you may have probably the infra TPM specifically for the compute or storage and networking, depends on how big of the company is. And you will also have some kind of initiatives associated to that. So you may probably want to kind of work on scalability and flexibility, agility part of it, or you may have developer efficiency aspects of things. In terms of build, test, and deployment areas, you may have to kind of improve. So there's always constant improvements the company would be looking at. Whether they have the data center of their own, or they may be using one of those cloud services, which is like the Microsoft Azure or AWS services or Google Cloud. You may probably have in some of those areas that your presence there. It depends on that. The initiatives around that will also be kind of in those areas. But typically, what the infra TPMs would be driving in those areas. That's my.
Okay, so right, and the core responsibilities.
Typically, the responsibility is based on the initiatives, right? So TPMs are like not easy to come by for any kind of engineering teams. So it depends on the initiatives. There are multiple cross-functional teams that they have to kind of coordinate to kind of drive the scalability aspects of it or cost optimization. So that's where the TPMs would come in and then kind of break it down in terms of what components are to be kind of scaled up, and how do we kind of bring efficiency to some of those areas. But so like I talked about the developer efficiency, you may have to kind of bring in new systems to kind of improve your developer efficiency. So that may be a multi-year program that the TPMs would actually be put in and then kind of work on those areas.
Thanks so much, Bert. Hi, Vivian. Same questions for you again.
So I think infrastructure, or at least the infrastructure programs I work on, are pretty similar to what was Param and Kevin already described. I think the responsibilities that at least I have as a TPM are more focused on very specific initiatives. But because each of these infrastructure teams often work in silos on their own individual initiatives, my responsibilities are to bring them all together, identify where all the dependencies are, what needs to go first before you build something else and something else and something else in order to get to the sum of all the parts, which is, deploying on our cloud infrastructure and product on a new CSP, or deploying into a new boundary for the federal government.
Cool. Thanks so much. So, so I'd like to ask Kevin. So, could you please share a key experience or program that significantly shaped your career as an infrastructure TPM, and what important lessons you've learned from that?
Yeah, this goes a bit way back, so hopefully I, don't show my age here. But probably about 12 years ago, Google was trying to compete in the cloud space. So we were trying to externalize Google's infrastructure. Not the easiest thing to do because everything was in-house. A lot of intellectual property. It was very much tailored to Googlers. So when I joined Google Cloud, it was about 300 people. And by the time I left 4.5 years later, it was 17,000 people. So you can imagine being in a company from 300 to 17,000 people, what that scale is like, one. Two, the types of programs that you have to put in place just to scale with that kind of growth is crazy, right? We went from one product to about 108 products. You really have to think outside the box. The moment you put a program in place, it's gone, right? It's obsolete because here you are, 500 people just came in the next month. So you really have to think about how to scale, especially when all of us as TPMs, we are very organized, very structured, very type A. You want everything to land and be organized in a certain way. But with that kind of scale, you really have to start thinking outside the box, right? So how do you scale with an organization that scales, with a business that scales and scaling really fast? You really have to learn all the bits and pieces of infrastructure in the background. And we had a unique thing that we had to solve, which was we had to balance between internal infrastructure needs versus external infrastructure needs. So if you think keeping all your systems up and running is hard, the other thing for an infrastructure TPM is to think about what that supply is and what the demand is, right? Forecasting is a really hard thing to do. Even for us at Waymo, we do a lot of ML and AI, forecasting how we do development, how we do training and all the models. It's not easy, right? Not a lot of people even have that experience today. Even with all the AI companies today, they're all trying to learn how to scale accordingly. And it's very hard to think about that. The last thing you want to do is have engineers and developers ready to develop and not have the infrastructure ready to do that, right? So keeping it up and running is important, but there's also another piece to it, which is making sure you have enough supply and demand just to tailor to what the needs are. So just going through all of that over the years kind of made me think about infrastructure in a very different way. And even the scale of operations, the amount of, I mentioned, everything surrounds compute, storage, and networking. The data sets that we deal with, the amount of data we need to process, that can really change the way an infrastructure TPM learns and really builds their skills. So if you have the opportunity, try to work in really large scale environments because you'll see the world in a very different lens.
Yeah, thanks so much, Kevin. Param, yeah.
Cool. I had been a product and an infra TPM before, but one of the core projects I was fortunate enough to be part of was during my time at Amazon, that we were working to reduce our footprint in Oracle databases. So I was one of the TPMs driving that large program. That was a multi-year program. Together, we moved about 7,500 Oracle databases to AWS services. It went on for a while. So the learnings from that program was like, how do we kind of create some kind of a North Star goal that, having all the teams to kind of align and commit to a multi-year program. And then also the importance of having a multi-year roadmap for migrations of that scale. so that you don't have to kind of constantly work with working with the teams to kind of align on the importance of stack ranking or the prioritization of it every time. That takes a lot of your energy and then kind of bandwidth. So that's super important to kind of have the teams to align on a North Star goal when we kind of work on multi-year initiatives. And also taking time to do a retrospective quite often, so that you can together come as a team and celebrate the wins and then learn from it and be ready to kind of make some changes to the next set of things, so that you can course correct in terms of things that are actually not going right. When you're dealing with legacy systems, there are quite a few things that can basically kind of delay the program. So it's very important to kind of spend good amount of time to kind of figure out those legacy systems and identify the owners, identify the solution that may have to kind of move in. So it's not like a one size fits all. Like at least in the case of the Oracle program that we work with, we did not actually kind of move to ODS. We had multiple solutions that we figured out during the course of time. So that may be the scenario in most of the migrations projects that you deal with, typically like the legacy systems. So you may probably have quite a few surprises that you have to kind of keep some bandwidth to kind of address. So there are quite a few interesting kind of journey that I had, particularly for that program. So the learnings basically are having a kind of importance of North Star goal, and then have the retrospective quite often, and then get the kind of reasonable time to kind of do the roadmap for multi-year, so that when the teams have to start the work and when somebody is going to kind of block your work. So these are important things to kind of identify those critical paths when you have to kind of deal with these migrations projects.
Thanks so much, Param.
So I think one of the experiences in my that was probably the most defining for me as an infrastructure TPM also happened to be my first ever program in the infrastructure space. I got thrown into it after being a product program manager for many, many years. And so I went from being able to visually see what we were building and visually see the progress to having to understand all these backend, all these infrastructure components like, Puppet, Terraform, et cetera, and like what they do, trying to understand. And not only trying to understand what they do, but trying to understand what controls we had to implement at the time in order for our product to be able to meet the FedRAMP moderate control requirements in order to sell to the federal government. So it was a lot of discovery. I think one of the most defining things for me in that program was just being comfortable asking lots and lots of questions. I know, there's a saying, fake it till you make it. It's really hard to do that when you have no idea what the components are that you're working with, what the controls mean. Like if you've ever read the control language for FedRAMP moderate, it is incredibly vague and you have no idea how that actually applies to your system. So just asking a ton of questions. And even when someone says, okay, I think this is what the control means, this is how we implement it with our system, just like continuing to ask, like, are you sure? Are you sure that that's, the right thing to do? Do we have to do it that way? What if we don't do it that way? What if we leverage an existing process that we already have? Are we going to fail the control or can we talk around it? And so I think that for me has been a really critical, like core thing that I've done with all of my infrastructure programs is just keep asking questions, because not everyone actually knows how everything works together. And so to expect that the TPM knows, or, a lot of times the TPMs don't know. A lot of times the individual engineering managers themselves don't know. And so I just continually ask questions until I bottom out on what the answer is. And oftentimes that helps everyone else understand things that they didn't previously know either.
Yeah, that's a really good point, actually. So on top of that, so you mentioned control. So it could be like different meaning, in outside of the company and different meaning in the company. So, and did you get any backfire from engineering teams, like asking too many questions, for example?
No, there's an art to asking questions so that so that people don't think you're asking dumb questions. And one of my tactics is to always start with, this might be a dumb question, but that generally makes people feel uncomfortable thinking that the question that you're asking is actually a dumb question. So, but I mean, obviously I'm not asking dumb questions. It's usually just a precursor to kind of call out like, hey, has anyone thought about this before? Because I can't have been the first. Sometimes I do end up being the first, and that's usually concerning.
All right, thank you, Vivian. So Param, I have a question for you. So you come from software engineering background, right? and then you become an infra TPM. So what led you to transition from a software engineer to TPM?
This is a great question. I had a long journey, I would say. I started as a data center engineer back in the days that we had this .com bubble, and I quickly transitioned myself into the internet-based web applications, mainly because this .com bubble also kind of introduced quite a demand in terms of most of the companies hitting the internet-based kind of businesses. I wanted to kind of quickly learn about like what the web-based applications are like and what it basically demands. So that's how I transitioned myself from being a data center engineer to a web-based kind of engineer. I learned quite a few kind of technologies there. It's all out of my curiosity and also the demand basically that brought you into like wherever the industry is kind of taking you into. So you got to kind of catch that and understand like this is where the kind of trend is going into, and then you got to be kind of keeping your doors open to learn new things. And from there on, I kind of went all the way to kind of running my own company, built a couple of products in the e-commerce and also the consumer transportation field, built products and then the similar field. So, and then that's how I kind of landed into Amazon. To answer your question about how I became a TPM, I think the challenges typically the TPM would have to kind of solve. Like, you don't have a team of yourself. You'll have to kind of influence the team, influence your idea to kind of get things done. This is what kind of I liked it. I would say that, I was kind of little tempted to take up the engineering manager role, but this is not something that I kind of tried before. I wanted to kind of test out that field. Since I had both options open, I tried doing the TPM role. I kind of liked it mainly because of the challenges that it kind of continues to push you in terms of having to lead the initiatives where you don't even have your own team, right? It basically pushes your limits to be able to kind of come up with your own ideas and then kind of figure out ways to kind of influence them and then get it done no matter what. It kind of I would say I am kind of here as a TPM.
Actually, I can say so. My background is kind of similar like yours. I also come from software engineering background. I founded my own startups. I was, one man show, one man company, and then partnerships. I understand the struggle. You have to convince everyone, especially getting the payment from customers. Maybe the hardest part was.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's why I also chose TPM trail as well. Yeah.
I think initially it puts you you have to push your limits basically. Like you'll definitely feel very uncomfortable when you're asking a lot of questions because you don't do the coding, but you still have to kind of ask so many questions to understand like what the setup is like, what the infra is like, or what are the different products, how do they even interact each other. So you got to ask a lot of questions. The moment you start doing it, you'll also discover that people haven't even thought about some of those questions, and that's when you'll find some of those areas are actually kind of loosely been there. You'll have to figure out how do you even bridge that.
Yeah, thank you, Param. So, Kevin, you have experience working in cloud-provided space, fintech, and now self-driving cars. And I assume the infrastructure layer is different across these industries and companies. So, what new skills did you have to develop for each new industry, and what skills were transferable?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, how many of you here have taken Waymo? Oh, look at that. That's great. If you go in San Francisco these days, we just opened, we just removed the wait list, so you can now just download the app and get a Waymo. It's a very great experience. So, I've done quite a bit of different industries and different applications, so to speak. Everything from cloud to payments to commerce to fintech to self-driving cars. As I mentioned, infrastructure is quite common. It's almost like a commodity across whatever industry you're at. It really boils down to your compute, your storage, and networking. The difference is one level up, how you apply infrastructure to solve the problems that you need to solve, right? In self-driving cars, I mean, truthfully, you got to be a bit crazy to kind of drive a 1-ton car without a driver, right? And have all these systems kind of work, in a way where you really focus on safety and reliability of the system, right? Human driver, for us, even human driving is hard enough. trying to get a system to drive on its own is a really hard thing to do, right? Even if you do image recognition, you know that sometimes there's errors. Now, a car needs to think about that almost every millisecond before it makes a decision to move forward, right? So the scale in which we operate, the amount of data that we have to store, we have to process and transfer across the board, is by far the craziest I've ever done at Waymo. But there are commonalities across because you just utilize infrastructure in a very different way, just based on the needs of what your application does at the end of the day. So the configurations are different, but you think about things the same way. You have your security layer, you have your observability, right? You have all the things that you typically would do with infra at the end of the day to help drive that application. So in that sense, the skill is transferable, the knowledge is transferable. It's just the way you apply that infrastructure knowledge to that specific area and that specific problem at the end of the day.
Can you maybe speak a little bit about the scale here? Because, as we actually talked before the event, it was really quite a good topic, like how to scale the AI here in this case, when you speak about the infra.
Yeah, how many of you here work in at least AI and ML infrastructure? Okay, a couple of you here, right? You can imagine, I mean, we are going through quite a shift in the industry, right? For the longest time, content was created by humans and in some ways modified by a script or so, right? So a lot of the content is stored. Now we're entering an era where content is generated by some software that none of us have seen before. And the shift into that model, especially from an infrastructure point of view, it's really going to change the industry. What used to be brute force computing is now going to shift to accelerated computing. While the space is different, the power consumption is a lot higher, right? So you really have to start thinking of infrastructure in a very different way, because the model and the modality of how you process data, how you store data, and how you move data around is really going to be different. And I also say this from a Waymo point of view, because we've been doing AI and ML for a long time. The amount of data that we have to deal with the amount of data we have to process on the car, on the cloud, and stuff like that is just by far like different scale that I've never seen before. So you really have to think about how that's going to change industry as a whole. And for us, or for all of you TPMs that have not worked in that world where you have multiple engineers probably working on one single model, right? You will have to start shifting in the way you think about stuff, because when you start training models, one wrong click can cost millions of dollars, right? So that cost, that availability of supply and demand for your developers needs to be thought in a very, very different way. So that's probably where the shift is coming pretty soon.
Yeah, thanks so much, Kevin. So speaking about clouds, actually, Vivian, I'd like to ask you, so what are some of the nuances about deploying onto different cloud providers within government entities?
So we actually currently only have a government offering on AWS, not yet on GCP or Azure, but some of the nuances are less so on the nuances are less so on the infrastructure side and more so about how you implement each of the controls. I mentioned earlier, if you've ever read any of these controls, the wording is incredibly vague. It's written by someone who has probably no technical background whatsoever. And so you have to take that wording and figure out how you implement this in a way that satisfies it, and that in a way that you can convince the federal agency that's reviewing your packet that you've actually done what you said that you would do. So I think what a lot of people, when they hear things like FedRAMP Moderate, FedRAMP High, they immediately think, oh, this must be a much more secure environment than commercial because of the way that you've implemented the controls in the infrastructure. What they don't realize is that it's actually a lot of negotiation and interpretation, and someone being able to represent your infrastructure and your offering to the federal government in a way that convinces them that your offering does meet their very vague requirements. It's difficult to explain, and I personally had to spend a lot of time explaining this to different folks at Splunk, when, they hear that we're building a FedRAMP High offering, they immediately think there's a very specific set of things that we have to do. And if we don't do those things, then we won't be able to sell to the federal government. And so it's just being able to, like, again, as I said earlier, ask questions like, what if we don't do it this way? Does that actually mean that we won't get our authorization? Or is there some other way that we can show a compensating control? And so, yeah, it's not as black and white as people think.
That's interesting to hear, actually. So, all right. So, Param, I'd like to ask you, how have your training and certifications related to coding or AWS and Microsoft technologies help you in your career?
I would say initially it was in terms of understanding the technology, but not literally, I would say. Beyond a point, I think you got to kind of understand the technology in whatever best method that you can basically learn that. Certification is one of the ways, but you don't have to be kind of limit yourself in terms of learning that. So there are multiple avenues in which we can learn it, but initially, like trying to understand about the AWS when not many people were kind of offering the trainings. That was one of the ways that I was able to kind of get the training directly from Amazon, and then that was the time that we didn't have so many different AWS services available. But beyond a point, I think now things are all completely open on the internet, so you don't have to wait for certification to prove yourself, and then kind of we can continue to learn new things, new topics. Yeah. So even now, I kind of trying to understand different AL models and also the experimentation techniques that we have, trying to kind of understand that space too. So we could still do that even now.
Yeah, thank you. And so, Kevin, I know you also work in developer experience domain at Waymo. And would you like to speak the biggest challenges you're facing in terms of developer experience at Waymo?
Yeah, for those of you who are in the infra space, you know that once you set up the infrastructure, that's the first step. Now you have to have a framework for the engineers to kind of use those infrastructure, right? How do you leverage all the pieces that you've set up, even at the bare metal level, which is your compute network storage, your application level, which is your observability, security, and all these other pieces. And now you want to make your developers as productive as possible. So some organizations have a dev infrastructure group, and this is typically to kind of help developers be more productive at the end of the day, right? The last thing you want to do is for them to sit down and tinker with the hardware, tinker with the software configuration and stuff like that, like scaling your database and stuff like that. That's not their job, right? That one you leave to the infra people. So the developer infra and developer experience at the end of the day is just really trying to make your organization productive in a way where they can scale and keep up with whatever their development needs are, right? A lot of ML stuff we're still trying to figure out along the way, right? Just because the scale has changed tremendously. But you can imagine a company like Waymo that used to be a research organization where we kind of focus on features. And now we're shifting to a commercialized business. We're now focusing on timelines. How do you get the developer to kind of think of their development lifecycle in a very different way? Changes, right? So now you start thinking of productivity. I mentioned forecasting what the developer needs are. It's a very, very hard thing to do. And all the other bits and pieces for them to make sure that they go from writing code to submitting code to deploying code to production. That whole thing needs to be streamlined. And it's not easy because sometimes different industries and different applications, I'm pretty sure all three of us solve developer experience very differently. Those kind of need to be tailored to the organization as well as at the end of the day. So you kind of have to look at developer productivity in a way where developers feel like they have enough tools or enough automation for them to do things in an efficient manner.
So can we say like kind of, again, the productivity and also scale within the organization?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. And so Vivian, this is for you. And what are the biggest misconceptions about what infra TPMs do?
I think one of the biggest misconceptions about not just infra TPMs, but TPMs in general is that we're just there to schedule meetings, take some notes, build a nice Gantt chart, report out on status. To me, that's all just paperwork. That's like the paperwork part of my job. But as a TPM, I think one of our core responsibilities is problem solving for everything. So like, how do you coordinate like 15 different engineering teams where there's dependencies between every single one of those teams to deliver against a goal? How do you define the goal? Who do you need to pull together to make sure that those goals are defined? How do you ensure that those goals are socialized in a way that everyone knows what the end goal of the program is and that you keep reiterating to them? And so I think we're not just glorified administrative assistants, which I think a lot of engineering teams tend to treat TPMs as. I think the really strong and effective TPMs that I've always worked with have always just been like real problem solvers, and that's how they end up leading the initiatives rather than just being a supporting figure.
Thank you. That was a real pain point, actually, in terms of TPMs. All right. So before we, get in questions from the audience here today, so do any of you have any final thoughts or key takeaways you'd like to share with us here today?
Yeah, particularly for infra TPM, somebody wanting to get into that space, right? There are quite a few different opportunities, but it depends on the industry though. If you're looking to kind of get into some kind of a technology company, you'll have to kind of understand the space basically, like, take infra as a component, figure out the areas that, you think you can kind of get in, like, it could be in the compute storage or somewhere in the data side of it. And there's also this compliance and overall the data governance and regulations aspects of things that the companies are heavily investing in, that, you have to kind of understand, like, how do you deal with the privacy of those data? It's an area where I think TPMs could definitely make an impact, because it's an area where the engineering team themselves are kind of figuring out, like, what the compliance is about, what are the different data regulation looks like, how do you kind of get your data to be approved by the privacy team, right? What sort of changes and what sort of controls that you have to put in place to be able to kind of go through that regulation process is also something that, I would say TPM can definitely get in and then kind of understand that space.
Thank you, Param.
I think, one of the key things that, at least when I'm interviewing and when I'm looking for TPMs, is what makes this person stand out in their program. I know like every single initiative, any project, it takes a team to deliver, but really what makes that particular TPM stand out rather than being the person that's just waiting to be told what to do? Like, how does this person lead? How does this person show some sort of initiative? Like, how did they go and get there and dig in and solve a problem rather than waiting to be told, like, hey, can you track this? Can you set up a meeting with these people? I think just being willing to do anything to get the job done. I think Param mentioned earlier, like, as a TPM, you have to be willing to do anything to get the job done, whether or not it's actually within your scope, or it might be someone else's scope, but they're not doing it. Like, I'm always happy to just jump in and get it done if someone else isn't doing it.
And final thoughts, Kevin?
Yeah, I think if I were to make a statement on what you want to take away from this talk, and at least for those of you who are starting out or wanting to be a TPM or shifting to an infra TPM or in the infra TPM space, I want to echo something Vivian said, where you're not just there to run a program. That's no longer the key thing of a TPM role. You really have to start honing your skills, even from an engineering point of view or from a product point of view, right? You have to be multi-skilled. Program is not enough. You have to sit in the room with engineering and product to really drive stuff at the end of the day, right? We also used to be viewed as people who just get projects done, right? That needs to shift. You need to start thinking about the ownership of the program and your area at the end of the day. So, owning and driving a lot of what you do is very important. You have to also have a little bit of intellectual curiosity. TPM by nature is a leadership role, right? One of us can really go through the entire organization and really shift the organization in ways where most people can't do, right? So you really have to think of that multiplier mindset of how you really help the organization move from where it is to being a way more efficient organization at the end of the day. And that requires you to dig into many different areas, right? The one thing we forget is while we're sitting with engineering and product managers, they're really specialized in their area. And you may feel like an imposter, like, oh, I only know like 25% or 50% of what they know. But we're the only people that knows 50% of every single area, right? So we see everything across the board. We see the gaps. We see at least the entire strategy. And the real role of the TPM is to really come in and help leadership, help the organization drive and move forward in a way where all these individual groups and individual people can't do at the end of the day. So for me, for those of you who are infra TPMs or wanting to be TPMs or TPMs in general, that's our role, right? Driving the organization in a way where we can really help it grow. It is a leadership role. That's why I love it. You don't just get stuck in one thing, and you get to meet and influence a lot of people with very little people at the end of the day.
I want to include one point. There's also a misconception to an extent that TPMs are not customer facing. In a way, it is true in some sense because TPMs may actually be working very closely with the product engineering, so that they are limited to an extent. But it is also very important to kind of understand who your customers are when you're dealing with the product, so that you can work backwards from customers, how they are using your product, whether it is an internal system or an external customer facing system. So that you can understand what the customer journey looks like when you're kind of launching something, so that when product and engineering miss something, you would be the best person to kind of ask them to find out, like, is this how the customers are actually kind of using the product, so that they can always build the right thing for the customers, no matter what, while you keep the programs on track.
Yeah, these are really great insights. Thank you so much. Janet just mentioned that we have a question from the online audience.
Hey, thank you. So I represent the folks virtually. So we have about 20 of them joining. We have one question. So a question from Rahul, not necessarily specifically about infrastructure, but here's the question for pretty much all three of you or any one of three of you. And it's funny, we could not avoid the topic of AI, right? So how AI will impact TPM space in terms of opportunities in the near future, how TPMs can get ready for new challenges from AI standpoint.
Actually, it's interesting because I have to write these leadership status reports every month that kind of distill down a very, very complex program into very simple language for leadership to read, such that, because they don't have a lot of time. So, obviously they have to be able to get it within 4 pages. I've been told to use ChatGPT, which would save me time. I have a serious mistrust of ChatGPT's writing skills and ability to actually communicate the message properly. So I personally am not that worried. I think my writing skills are actually quite strong, and I don't think ChatGPT could write better than I can. So, but I think I think AI pulls from a lot of different sources. And if you read a lot of the things on the internet, a lot of blogs and whatever, they're actually very wordy, which doesn't help me in the thing that I need to do, which is communicate a message very efficiently and effectively to people who don't have time to read. And so I think that's one thing that I don't think AI can do. I mean, maybe they'll do it in like 5-10 years, but for now, I'm not concerned that I can't use ChatGPT.
I'm personally a fan of some of those AI tools. I already started using ChatGPT, and also in some cases, there's also intelligent scheduling tools. You would see some of the SaaS-based platforms. If you want to kind of schedule like a one-on-one or something, it can find some kind of a way to kind of get something in your calendar to kind of get the folks. There are multiple kind of AI-based tools that basically facilitates and also save your time. I would say rather than looking at that as a threat, I would probably figure out ways how we can use that so that we can minimize our disruption and effectively use our time for other areas where we think that we can kind of solve some bigger problems, in my opinion.
My joke is I worry about AI if it gets once autocorrect works, but I think like anything that's out there today, it's a good augment or help to our day-to-day work. I don't think it's a replacement yet. I think we've really just scratched the surface of what we can do with it, especially from an infra point of view, right? Infra is a lot of data. We track and observe everything, right? There's just so much data that's coming through the system. I'd imagine there'll be a day where you almost have systems that kind of assist people who administer the systems to make your infrastructure more efficient at the end of the day, right? It starts figuring things out, forecasting stuff and things like that in a very meaningful way where it can actually tell you things ahead of time or things to look out for in the future. I don't think we're there yet, but I'm pretty sure at some point in the future we'll get there, right? It's just that we're still in such an early phase of that we're not there yet. Even from an infrastructure point of view, I mentioned a lot of us are shifting into a new development world. What used to be zones and zones of compute is now changing into like smaller zones of accelerated computing. That itself is a fundamental shift in infrastructure, right? Now we're going to have a power problem instead of a supply of hardware problem. I heard like from some stat somewhere that the amount of power that all these data centers are going to use in the US is going to be about 20% pretty soon and growing. So how do we deal with all that? That's where we also come in to kind of look at everything as a whole and see, how can we as infrastructure TPMs deploy infrastructure in a way where it's sustainable and also usable by our developers at the end of the day, right? Just from a capacity point of view.
That's a really great domain of questions, actually. I mean, the power will be really big question mark for, not now maybe, but for a really soon future, a big problem for all of us here. So any questions from audience here today?
Thank you so much, firstly, for the talk. It was amazing, especially the leadership piece and the end that ties a lot of things. I work at Moody's right now as a TPM, and firstly, Kevin, I live in San Francisco for 2 years. I had early access to Cruise, so I've been writing more of that, and I have some experiences that I'll talk about afterwards, but it's yours better. Yeah. So my question is, we have. You mentioned AWS, there's Google Cloud. We have some solution architects in the rooms. So how much, when you said, ask more questions, today itself, there were some things that were going on top of my head. I was like, I don't know this one yet. So how technical should you be? And, and does it even help if you go too much on that route and, spend much time on being more and more technical? Or is there a point where you go, this is enough, and then you have 50% of all, as you mentioned, and then you're like, oh, I'm good. But that's the question. Thanks.
Yeah, I can give a brief on that. I think that's a good question, right? It depends on your curiosity level and also like how much you can kind of spend time to kind of go deeper. But beyond a point, you're not going to be doing someone else's work. Like if you start doing coding for someone else, I think that's not the right way to kind of put in your effort. So as a TPM, if you want to kind of continue to be a TPM, what are the areas that you can basically add value that others are not able to fill in is where you have to kind of consciously look at, so that you can draw the line somewhere and then kind of limit within that and see like whether that is a good use of your own time to be able to kind of being a success in that role as a TPM, let's say.
Yeah, I think you have to be technical. My answer is you have to be technical to a point. So I know all the names of the components. I've studied architecture diagrams. I'll go into like the code and see what people are doing more because I also have a sense of distrust of how quickly people are moving. And so like I want to be able to see what's being done and how quickly it's being done. But being a TPM is a really fine balance of figuring out how you influence people that don't report to you. And so if you start getting into their work and telling them how they should do things, that's not going to end well for your relationship with that engineering team. And so that's why it's, to a point, like you want to be able to ask questions, intelligent questions that help your engineering teams think about what they should do next or who else they need to talk to get their work done. But I definitely don't want to be in the business of trying to do their job because I want to make sure that like they don't see me as overstepping into their world.
Yeah, I don't have much to add. I mean, Vivian and Param gave really good answers there. I think the one big shift too in the last few years is access to knowledge, access to technical stuff has really been democratized through all these large language models. If you actually try coding and stuff, whether it's Copilot or Gemini or ChatGPT, it's pretty amazing, right? You can ask specific questions, modify code, benchmark code. Like I was asking which is faster, this or that, and it was actually writing down all the speeds for me. It's really changed the way we operate. And we live in a really crazy time where all that knowledge is accessible to us in a way where we can ask very specific tailored questions that typically we would have to wait in a traditional model, right? Think of your Stack Overflow. You would have to ask a question, wait for some person or some expert that's available to answer that, wait for someone to vote for the best answer. That's all gone, right? You can ask and get an answer right away. So we've democratized a lot of the knowledge in a way where not only us in engineering and tech can get that, everyone else can get that as well. So I think we live in a world where it's very different today. And as long as you're intellectually curious and you can sit in a room and have the right conversations with engineering and product, that's the right path to go.
Okay. Yeah, let's take one more from the room and then we'll shift to the virtual as well.
Thank you. Vivian, question for you. When you explained that, what are the misconceptions you generally see about the TPM role, right? You talked about, we are seen as somebody who is just doing the reporting and, drawing those charts and all. What is the misconception you have seen as a technical ability of, TPM? How people perceive that, which is a misconception?
To be honest, I think the engineering organization I work in, they have there's a range of technical TPMs that they've worked with, and so I don't know that there's any misconception that a technical TPM is supposed to be to the technical degree of like an architect. I think generally the assumption is that we have no idea what's going on. We're just there to be a scribe and take notes, and so for me personally, I've always tried to overcome that by just digging in where I can, finding out information where I can, reading where I can, and being able to show, that, hey, I'm not just here to take direction from you. I'm actually giving you guys directions on what you need to do and what you need to do next. So let's make sure that this relationship is clear between me and the program team.
So what advice you will give to somebody who is starting? I mean, being in the industry and
Yeah.
yes, I know how to navigate and how to have that balance, like how to manage those discussions and how to make your presence felt and how you're asking the smarter questions. But somebody who is starting new, what advice you give them to feel comfortable about your technical abilities when you're working as a TPM and not as an engineer or product manager?
I think one advice I would give is if you don't know, just Google it, just look it up. I think, as Kevin was saying earlier, back when I started, if I didn't know something, I just had to hope that somebody wrote it down in Confluence or in some wiki and I could read about it and figure it out. But nowadays, it's so easy to get information. It's, if I don't know, I didn't know what, for example, on the current program that I'm on, I didn't really understand what they were talking about in terms of an Azure tenant organization and the structure and the hierarchy. So I just went and looked it up. I printed out some things I read. I think just being willing to read and absorb the information for someone who's starting out is really helpful. And then as they get more and more as they progress more and more in their career, just not being afraid to ask questions. I think one thing I was afraid of early in my career was asking questions because I was worried that I would look dumb or, other people would know. But I found at a certain point, I was like, I'm asking these questions and nobody has an answer. So I'm not the only one. Obviously, like other people don't know either. And so it's not always bad to ask questions. Like you'll find a lot of times in a big group of people, sometimes people just don't want to speak up because they don't want to be the ones who look like they're asking a dumb question. And so I think just, not having that, block that makes you feel like, if I say this, am I going to look dumb? If I say this, is it going to be wrong? Maybe if I speak up and it's not the right thing, like maybe I shouldn't do that. I've often said things or, had opinions in large group meetings that were incorrect. And that's okay, but it kicks off a discussion. And that's really the important thing.
Awesome. Very interesting topic on the technical skills. And we have a question from the virtual audience. Actually, we have two questions, which I think is I can combine in one, but it piggybacks on the technical skills question. So how do you balance technical skills with program management skills, and which do you find more critical in your day-to-day work? So that's first one, technical versus program management. And then I want to bundle it with another question, which is kind of similar, that infra TPMs work across improving code efficiency, stabilization processes, to managing product deliverables. How do you divide your bandwidth across wearing multiple hats? So first one, technical versus program management. Second one, infra versus product. Seems like a lot to cover.
I'll try my best here. Yeah. So there is a reason why there is a T in the TPM space, right? So you got to kind of do and represent the technology to an extent. So which technically means that you don't have to necessarily wear that technical hat throughout your program. So the initial time of it, when you're kind of brainstorming to figure out a solution, or when there is a design phase, you got to be kind of understanding like what the architecture looks like and what are the different components here, and are we even implementing the right solution to this. I think that's a time that I would say that it is very critical for the TPMs to wear the T hat here, so that they understand the space and be able to kind of ensure that people are kind of implementing the right solution. And beyond that, I think it may, once it basically gets into the implementation phase, I think you may have to kind of wear the program management aspects of it to be able to say that to ensure that the program stays on track and it's the milestone, and be able to kind of commit the delivery of what we want to kind of get that done within the timeline that we want to kind of ensure it is done. So it depends on like now you want to kind of juggle between multiple hats here at different phase of the program. That's how I would probably put it. And in terms of multiple programs that you have to kind of allocate your time, it definitely, I would say, I think TPM have to kind of go through it, right? They will kind of get overwhelmed in terms of having to juggle between multiple programs at any point in time. So to an extent, I think we'll have to forecast like what your bandwidth is going to be. Depends on what phase of the program is going to be at any point in time. So if there is an initial implementation that we'll have to kind of put in here, ensure that you set the expectations to your stakeholders that this is how I'm going to kind of put your bandwidth into multiple programs, and then you can kind of change the lever and then kind of work on something else and it becomes an autopilot mode for other programs. So it largely depends on forecasting and also setting the expectations to stakeholders so that you can avoid any kind of surprises from the people when you kind of tone down in terms of your bandwidth.
Maybe let's take one final question from the audience. Oh man, so many. I know Pallavi had her hand raised before, so if you folks don't mind, we'll go with this question. But then the food is ready for those who are in person, so you can ask the questions over the quick bite. Okay, Pallavi.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Pallavi. My question is mostly I've seen infrastructure teams don't have PM. There's either no PM or very few PMs. Want to understand how y'all navigate, and are y'all wearing your PM hat more in the TPM, because we are wearing multiple hats as a TPM, right? Sometimes we're executing from the product point of view, from engineering point of view. Sometimes we're just doing the project management. But in infrastructure, Have you all seen this? And are you all executing PM more than the engineering side of it? Just curious. I previously used to be an infrastructure TPM. I am a product TPM right now. But yeah.
For a clarification, when you say PM, it's a product manager or program
Product manager,
product
yes.
manager.
Yeah, product
Okay, yeah.
manager, not a program manager. Yeah,
There's
product
definitely
manager.
overlap for the TPM with product managers as well as the engineering managers. It depends on the size of the company and also the requirement there. So you may have to kind of extend your arm to kind of fill in what a product manager would actually kind of do, and also in some cases like what the engineering manager would actually be doing. But pretty much like in some cases, if TPM is not something that they want to invest in some companies I've seen that the engineering managers would actually do both the roles together. So the moment it becomes overwhelming, that that's when the TPMs would actually be kind of required there and kind of lessen the bandwidth for the rest of the folks. In terms of
so I think in my current program, I'm acting as both the product manager and the TPM, and so it's really challenging, especially because I'm not very I don't get into creating like the Jira tickets, for example, for each of the individual engineering teams, but I started with working backwards from what are like the different customer workflows or scenarios that we want to be able to test at once we GA, and then go backwards from there. Okay, well, what infrastructure pieces have to be available in order to support this? What infrastructure pieces have to be available to support the scale that we want to be able to get to when we launch. So yeah, I think in this particular case, it is odd because I think a real product manager would probably sit down with this team. They would create all of the Jira tickets, prioritize for them, get into like the really nitty gritty details. But since we don't have that support in my particular program, it's just sort of working backwards from where we want to be.
Thank you.
Yeah, I have a very different philosophy on this. A good infrastructure team will have a very strong tech lead and a very strong TPM. Nothing against product managers, but I think the value of, I've worked with infra product managers as well, but the value of a product manager comes in when there are actual user journeys, right? When there are requirements. If you think about infra, it's mainly what needs to be available, how do you scale, how do you deploy, and stuff like that. Not a lot of user journeys behind it. But once you start getting into the user journey realm, dev infra, application and stuff like that, there is value in having a product manager there. But my philosophy is mainly a strong TL and a strong TPM can really drive infrastructure or any infrastructure program in a way where you don't really necessarily need a PM at the end of the day. Yeah, the follow-up note for those of you online, she asked about developer products, developer tools, developer productivity pieces. Yes, definitely, because now you have requirements for people that need to use the infrastructure. You have a journey from start to end, and that's when probably the engineer and TPM can kind of play that role too. But sometimes for very heavy user journey stuff, we probably should have a product manager in the equation.
Thanks so much for our speakers today joining us. The food is ready. I also would like to thank Coda for supporting us today and providing their office, and again, all the refreshments and the food. Thanks, Al, again, for helping us. And of course, Jana to taking care of the technical stuff on, all the online attendees. And Robert, of course, yeah. Robert. And Snell. And on behalf of TPM Trails Bay Area, thank you everyone for joining us today. And please don't hesitate to reach out to us for your opinions, advice, questions. And yeah, we are open always for help. And thank you again. Yeah, enjoy your food.